copies through, what is it, Donors
Choose, yep.
Great. So I thought what we would do, let's see. Yeah, I'll go over, what I want to talk about, but I want to stress that I definitely don't want to give you guys a very long monologue. It will be boring for you, it will be boring for me. So if you have questions as we go along, just, raise your hand, and I'll be sure to leave plenty of time so we can have a more interactive discussion, okay? So what I'll do in this little presentation is I'll talk about Damselfly. I'll talk about linked and parallel texts and why they work in schools and what they are. A little about my life, which we can or cannot talk about. How I became an author, the process of book publication, and then, like I said, questions from you at the end or during is fine. And just because every school is different, I wanted to get a sense of how many of you are interested in hearing about two things. One of them is the publication process. Are any of you interested in learning how books get published? Oh, great. All right. And what about writing a novel? Oh, so a bunch of you. Do any of you want to be authors? Oh, wow. Oh, awesome. Okay, great. So we'll touch upon both of those things then. All right. So you all have books, or most of you have books, and I will freely admit that I have bought books based on covers. You do too. They say you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I think everybody does that. And the cover, it really serves two purposes, right? One is it's a piece of advertising. It's the one thing that you're getting that draws you in or not. And also it tells you a little bit about the book. And I can't really take credit for the cover. I think it did come out well, but it was done by two people at Scholastic. Well, one at Scholastic was the designer, and they hired an artist that lives in the United Kingdom that does book covers only. And the reason I like the cover is that it just gives you a lot of information, and the longer you look at it, the more information it does give you. You can see, at first glance, you see the silhouette of a girl and you see the colors, right? And the colors are fiery and dark, so they immediately tell you there's probably going to be danger in this book, in a sense of uncertainty. And then as you look closer, there's a lot of stuff going on in the silhouette. What do you guys see in there?
A fly.
You see a fly, right? Okay, so that's actually the damselfly, which is explained kind of toward the end. Yeah.
Jungle-ish kind of scenery.
Sorry, say it again.
Jungle-ish kind of scenery.
Jungle-ish scenery, exactly. There's this kind of dense vegetation going on, and in the book, all this dense, creepy vegetation informs the mood of the book. Anything else, guys? There's obviously this creepy guy, right? This guy, which it's hard to know exactly who he is in the book. How many of you guys have either read all the book or some of the book? So, a lot of you. So this guy either has to be one of the boys, one of the teen boys on the island, or he could possibly be, there is also an old man that comes into play. I don't want to give too much away, but he's one or the other. So you can actually tell a lot about the novel just from the cover alone. Oh, this is what we've just been talking about, so I can just skip that. Then the book, yeah, it's many things. It's a novel for readers of YA, and I want to stress that. So Scholastic says this book is for kids 12 and up, but a lot of adults are reading it too. And the big secret with young adult novels is just as many adults read them too, believe it or not. So I know I have read a lot of YA fiction and read a lot of it before I wrote it. So it's a good market because it has a large swath of the population. Damselfly, it's a few things. It's an adventure story, a survival story, a book about growing up, like a coming-of-age type of book, because the kids are on this island for a short amount of time, but they change a lot in that short amount of time, and they lose their innocence. And finally, it's a modern tale that can be read alongside Lord of the Flies. I can tell you how I came to write this book. Actually, the seed of this book was planted when I was in 8th grade, and I went to public school in North Haven, so I'm from Connecticut. And at that time, a long time ago, most of the curriculum was pretty old school. Like, I remember when I was in 8th grade, all the books we read were written by men, and they were all about boys or men. I remember being kind of not that pleased with that. I mean, it's fine. It's fine, but it's definitely better to have better representation in the books. And I remember reading Lord of the Flies, I was really struck by it. It stayed with me. It's a fantastic book. It's, you know, the creepiness, the idea that human beings could be so awful to one another, that really struck me. But what didn't strike me was that my female English teacher said that in making Lord of the Flies, who's read Lord of the Flies? Any of you? A bunch of you. Okay. Lord of the Flies is about a bunch of these British schoolboys on an island, and it's really a similar plot. They're on an isolated island without any adults, and it's about how these boys manage to live and how whatever kind of very delicate society they do forge crumbles apart. My 8th grade English teacher said in making that novel, the author, William Golding, had created the perfect microcosm, which is like this, almost like a small world that is reflective of the larger society. And as an 8th grade girl, I remember thinking, no, he didn't. It is not a perfect microcosm because there are no girls on this island. All these boys are the same age, they're all from the same background, they're all British. Like, I just was really upset by that, the lack of diversity in it. So ever since 8th grade, that I wanted to like read or write a book that had the same themes as Lord of the Flies, but included a lot more diversity, and I got to do it. Like in writing Damselfly, I got to do it. So that's why I wrote it, really. The plot, again, some of you have already read it or have read some, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically there's this private school, Drake Rosemont. It's fictional school, and it has all different kinds of kids in it. It's a private, like a posh private school, and there are some wealthy kids. There are a lot of wealthy kids there, but there are also kids who are on scholarship there, and you have kids of different races. And as an author, I always try to include mixed race characters because I'm half Asian, and there is definitely like a dearth of books that represent mixed race people. I don't know if you guys, if that is important to you or not, but it's interesting to me because 1 out of every 7 babies now is born mixed race, but the amount of mixed race books for kids last year, out of 3,000 books, there were only 10, like either written by mixed race people or like involving mixed race people. So it's definitely like a too small segment of books, and I think it needs to be a lot larger, especially since this multiracial group in American society, it's young, like a lot of them are like your age or younger, and it's growing 3 times faster than the regular American population. So it's a really big population, and there needs to be more on that, like more books available and more multiracial authors available. So that's something that I always stress. But anyway, the main character is mixed race, and there are some other characters who are multiracial in the book too. And that plays a role, their identity plays a role in terms of how they cope and how they act and whatever. But what's interesting about Damselfly is it's really the girls that are at the heart of the novel. The boys are definitely important, but they're not, they're a little bit more peripheral. And I did that on purpose just because we already have Lord of the Flies, which focuses on boys, and I wanted to create a book that maybe showed how in similar circumstances girls would behave. So that's what happens. And there's the hope that adults will come rescue them in the beginning, but as the days pass, that hope gets smaller and smaller until eventually they realize it's not going to happen. So I just wanted to try to envision, like it's easy to think about, I guess, being isolated on an island, but if you really think about it, how how difficult it would be, and the things that you wouldn't have. There are quite a lot of things. There are no phones, so you'd have no connectivity of any kind, no electricity, no running water, really, no creature comforts of any kind. You can just read through this list. If you can imagine that, just waking up, not having a phone, not having an alarm clock, not having a microwave, not having a place to sleep, not having clean clothes, all of that, it would be very, a big shock to your body and your soul. And on top of that, in my book, nature is everywhere. So you have wild boars, which also play a big role in Lord of the Flies. It's a very hot island. The water is crazy, so it's not an easy place to swim out of, and there's no other landmass in sight. There's this trapping pit, and what it is, it's a hunter's pit. So when they come across this pit, which is a hole dug in the earth that is meant to catch probably an animal or maybe a human, they find out that they are not the only humans on this island, which is scary in that they know that whoever else is there is not a friendly person or a friendly group of people. There's a tar pit. Does anyone know what a tar pit is? Want to explain it to the group, maybe? You want to explain it? Or you want to? What? It's tar, yeah, obviously. But anyone? No. Okay, so there's a famous tar pit in California. It's called La Brea Tar Pit, and it is literally just a pit of tar, right? Like a lake of tar. But what's scary about it is that whatever has fallen in there, like animals over time, it's all perfectly preserved. Like there are literally perfectly preserved dinosaur bones because the tar acts as a preservative. But as soon as something walks in there to drink from the water at the top, which looks like regular water because you don't see the tar below it, whatever poor creature that is trapped in the tar, just very much like the way you'd be trapped in quicksand, and ultimately kind of frozen in time in that tar as they sink. So it's a pretty creepy thing on this island, and there is a big scene involving one of the characters who falls in. There's the mysterious stranger, and the greatest threat to them all is actually each other, because the kids very soon after arriving start dividing into cliques and start kind of undermining one another and behaving very selfishly. All right, so I'm gonna again, I don't want to talk only. So does anyone can anyone tell me what a linked text is? Have you guys ever come across that label or whatever? All right, so in a nutshell, what it is a book, a modern book that's read alongside a classic. Like I was saying, I wrote this in response to Lord of the Flies. But there are here are some other examples. Have you guys read any of these or heard of any of these? Yeah, okay. And the idea is that just like many moons ago when I read Lord of the Flies, I got it, I enjoyed it, I understood why it was a classic and why it was so important. I didn't necessarily completely relate to it, and I think more and more what teachers are finding is that if they have a young adult book, a modern young adult book, read in tandem with the classic, it helps kids understand both texts better, because reading the YA book might give a better sense of plot and theme and content, and when you have a better perception of that book, sometimes there are inroads formed that allow you to understand the classic as well. So a lot of studies have shown that reading two together gives a better sense of not just the YA book, but also the classic, and that kids prefer this. So it's something that's happening more and more in education, and I think in the next 10, 15 years we'll see it as a pretty common practice. Just a little information about me. I told you I'm half Indian. I grew up in North Haven. I have 2 kids of my own who spend way too much time on the screen. So that's something that we struggle with. I'm inspired by people that take care of animals in the environment. And like I said before, I really feel like diversity in books is super important. So as an author, I'm committed to that. All right, how did I become an author? Well, as a kid, I initially wanted to be a visual artist, but I quickly figured out that I wasn't that great at it. So that transferred into wanting to write, because I was the kind of kid that always spent some time alone writing little stories, poems, and whatnot. Do any of you like to do that? Yeah, a lot of you? Okay, great. And my aunt, she was a great person to have in my family because she always made a living in books. And you might know her because she's written about 150, or she's illustrated about 150 children's books. Here are some of her things. I don't know if you've ever heard of the magazine Highlights for Children. Yeah, you've heard of it, yeah. So, I mean, she's illustrated a lot, and it meant a lot in my family to be able to see someone make a living off of doing books, because any of these careers in the arts, in publishing, being an actor, being a visual artist, it's hard to make money through that. So it was nice and refreshing to be able to see someone in my family be able to do that. And this is the story of how I got my first book published. All right, so I became very serious about wanting to be a writer when I was young. How old are you guys? Oh, perfect. 16. Oh, perfect. Okay. So when I was 16, I decided that I would get a book published because my dad, who's an immigrant, was like, "You're never going to be able to make a career in writing, so you better figure out a backup plan." And he was right. He was actually right about it. But it was like, so the best way for me to deal with this is to write a book now when I'm a teen and get it published. And that way, by the time I get out of college, I'll be set. I'll already have this writing career. I'll be on my way. So I wrote a collection of short stories, and at that time, the internet, it didn't exist really. I mean, it existed, but no one used it. Computers were huge and bulky. It was a different time. So I wrote 14 letters on a Selectric typewriter, and I printed them off, and I sent these letters, they're called query letters, to 14 literary agents, because literary agents are the people you need. A literary agent is the person who connects to editors at publishing houses. And I got 13 rejection letters back, and one literary agent said that she actually loved my collection of short stories and she would represent me. So I was super excited. I'm like 16, I'm golden, I'm good. And I went to New York and I met her. She was very impressive, and I was just really excited. And she sent my book out to editors at publishing houses, and I didn't really know questions to ask. I was only a kid. I didn't know much about this industry at that point, and the book did not sell. Nobody wanted to purchase the book. So then I was like, it's all right. I still have college to make my mark before I have to get out in the world and pay my bills. So I went to college and I wrote my first novel, and that actually went to a different literary agent, because by then I parted ways with my first literary agent, and that book did not sell at all. So then I was out of school, and it was the beginning of the internet boom, which you guys won't even remember because you were too young. And I was working actually as a content writer, so I was writing, but I was doing my fiction on the side. And it wasn't until I was 26, so a full 10 years after I started, that I was able to get my first book published. And it was not fiction, it was on the job market, but it was kind of my inroad into just publishing in general. And I tell you this whole story, actually not as a downer, but rather that at 16, at 17, 15, 18, whatever age you are, you guys are not too young to get serious. Because for me, it could have happened then, and it certainly can happen to you. So if you guys are serious about writing now, there is no reason why you cannot, finish something, research how to send it out to literary agents, figure out the whole process, and try to kind of kickstart your career now. And that doesn't have to be just writing. That could be really anything. Like at this age, 16, 17, you're still asked, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But I think it's really important to take yourself seriously at this age because you can accomplish a lot now. And then in terms of how a book gets published, so I kind of gave you a little overview of that just now, but one of the big things, especially for a novel, is that when you figure out the story you want to tell, you want to make sure it's really worthy of your time, because you're going to spend probably a year or more writing this book, and it's very easy to get sick of it. So from the get-go, you have to make sure that it's an idea worthy of your own time, and then you have to make sure it's an idea that might also fit into the framework of what's happening now in publishing. So one way to do that is to have like a comparable book, because publishers love to hear like, oh, this is a mix of Hunger Games and Twilight meets another book. So it's good to have a comparable book. Obviously you want to see if there are other things like your story on the market, but of course you also don't want to be telling a story that's already been told exactly. I'm a big on planning. I use Excel. I tend to make character sketches, like who I want my characters to be, an overview of the plot, just like a loose, chapter 1, chapter 2, or even major places I want to get to in my story. But I don't really micromanage my storyline. Like I let that come, but I have major markers of where I want to go as I'm writing, because it's very easy to get lost as you're writing and go to directions that you didn't mean to. Then you write, and then the most important part of writing, which your teachers probably tell you, is editing or revising. And that's what I spend 80% of my time doing. So here's just a page from a book that I finished recently. Hasn't been published yet. You can see there's a lot of writing on that, right? And this is actually like my 9th draft. So you can tell that your teachers maybe ask you to do another draft, do another revision, but you really can improve something forever. So, and there's a danger of that too, because sometimes you just can revise till the end of time and never quite get exactly the right book story you want. But it is important to revise enough that your language is fine-tuned, your sentences are fine-tuned. It is really important. And you can do that in writing groups, you can do that with teachers, you can do that with like a couple trusted mentors. You can do that with just one mentor that's really, knows a lot about writing and can help you, but it is important. And then I'm going to go through this quickly because I don't want to keep talking I want to hear some of your questions, but the basic trajectory of how a book gets published is, for fiction, you generally have to finish the book before you send it out. For nonfiction, like if it's a memoir or just any kind of other nonfiction, you can usually get away with a few sample chapters and then a synopsis of what you're going to be doing. And then also, for both kinds of books, again, it helps to have a comparison model in place. Like my book is like this book, and this book has, done really well on the market, and it's sold X amount of copies, which you can find out through the internet. And then you send it to a literary agent, and I can talk to you guys individually or when we do Q&A in a couple minutes, but you only want to get a literary agent that is unpaid. Your literary agent should only make money if they sell your book, because they're kind of like a realtor. They're going to take a commission of whatever advance you get, and your advance is the payment you get from a publisher. So if you approach a literary agent and they say, yeah, I can take you on, but I need, you have to pay me $1,000 or whatever, like that's not a legitimate literary agent. And then your literary agent will likely have editorial suggestions, and those suggestions will probably be less about maybe what he or she thinks of the story and more about marketability. because they generally have their hand on the pulse of the market. So you have more editing to do, and then if you're lucky, an editor at a publishing company will want the book, they'll buy it, which will lead to more editing. And ultimately your book will go through many revisions because you'll probably do some editing for your literary agent, you'll probably do some editing for your publisher, and then there's also this copy editor who does like the fine tuning, the grammar, sentence structure, all that. So it's a lot of work, and then by the time, but the payoff is you get to see your book in print, which is almost like a little present, when it's finally done. It's like all your hard work in this one place, and you get to do fun stuff like I get to do school visits and like book talks and all that. So I kind of went through this already. I think I'd love to take some questions or talk with you guys a little bit because I'm talking a lot. So who has a question or a thought about writing or this book? Yes. Yeah, he asked if I'm interested in writing science fiction. Yeah, well, the book I just finished is a little sci-fi. In terms of writing different kinds of books, I really do, actually. With Scholastic, it's pretty great because as a children's publisher, they do everything from those kindergarten board books, those cardboard books for little kids, all the way up through novels like this one. And what's really popular right now are graphic novels. Who likes graphic? You guys know? Yeah, I've only recently gotten into them. I'm really enjoying a lot of graphic novels now, and I was told by my editor that out of the 20 books that sold best out of Scholastic last year, 18 of them were graphic novels. So this is a good field to be in, and I am interested in doing it. So I can't draw, but you can always do the text and they'll find someone to draw for you. So yeah, is that something you're interested in, science fiction? Yeah, I think, I mean, there's definitely, I think that's a hot segment right now. So you could definitely pursue that. Yeah.
So like, if you're doing this book, do you find yourself relating to
Oh, yeah, the main character. I did relate to her in a lot of ways. Not just really the mixed race identity, because a lot of my books have mixed race characters, but I related to how, especially when I was a kid, I didn't have like the most established sense of self. I wasn't very confident, and for me, she was fun to write, but actually Mel was much more fun to write. She's the character that is so good at survival tactics, and she knows a lot. I much more enjoyed writing her because I haven't read too many girls in young adult fiction who are not consumed with some kind of problem, like they're anorexic or they're cutting themselves or there's family issues. Like, it was really refreshing to write a character that was just doing very well and happy with who she was. She's not that pretty, she's not popular, but she also doesn't care. Like, she's just happy being this person that's inventing stuff and bettering herself and taking care of the people around her. She was a really refreshing character for me to write. Yeah.
Where did you get inspiration to write?
Can you speak up? I can't.
Where did you get the inspiration to write this book?
To write this book?
Yeah.
Well, again, the seed was kind of planted in 8th grade with Lord of the Flies, and I also thought, well, that's not only interesting for me to write, but I think, like, in my head, I always have kind of two voices. One is, like, what do I want to write and what's interesting to me, and that has to be super important, but the other voice is, like, is this marketable, right? And fortunately, it really is, because now there's these two, I don't know if you guys have seen these hashtags, like own voices. Have you guys seen that? It's this emphasis on books written like by the people that they're writing about. Because remember I was giving you these stats about like multiracial fiction before? What's interesting, what's happening is that the number of diverse books is going way up, which is awesome. Like, there's so many more like African American, Asian American, Hispanic, Latinx characters, but a lot of them are being written by white people. So it's not like necessarily like the most genuine writing experience. So recently in the last, I'd say 2 years, there's been this movement called Own Voices, which encourages people who actually are like of color or an underrepresented group, maybe they're, you know, it could be gay, it could be whatever underrepresented group that is, to be writing books in that vein. Because publishers kind of finally caught wind of the fact that there is a need for more genuine voices. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained it well. Yeah, so there's that movement, and then there's also like a bigger movement toward diversity in general. And actually there have been a lot of new imprints. Imprints are like the smaller publishing houses within the bigger publishing houses. There's been a lot more imprints for like diverse voices. Yeah, sorry, so one of you was asking. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Ritika?
Oh, yeah, Ritika, yeah.
Oh,
So is Ritika?
It's alright.
Is Ritika based on a real person you had encountered with in your life?
No, she isn't, no. But she is like, yeah, I mean, she's kind of this, I think we all know Ritika, right? I think like we all know this kind of alpha girl that is like super pretty and super popular, but also it would be great if she was just those things but stupid. But no, she's also very smart and conniving, and she's a really powerful person. But unfortunately, she's not a very good person. So yeah, she was. I think we all know someone like that. She was a pretty easy person for me to write. Yeah.
I want to know how you felt about writing every other character besides, Matt and Ritika.
How I thought about the other characters?
They felt really annoying to me.
They felt annoying to you, the minor characters?
Yeah, they just kept on following, especially Chester.
Chester, yes. Oh my goodness. I would have to talk to you.
Yeah, the boy character, I can see how the boy characters would be annoying. So in Lord of the Flies, right, it's an allegory. So it's more supposed to be symbolic of how like society might be, right? But I don't mean my book to be an allegory. Like, I don't think if you took any random combination of boys and girls, this would necessarily be the outcome. You know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily think all boys are going to be like Pablo and Chester and Rish. But I purposely, in my book, because it's my book, I wanted to make the girls dominant. So the boys, yes, they are kind of annoying, right? Like, they're kind of like just. Yeah, they're not the best. They're not the best leaders on this place, and I also like Chester is that character because he's this athletic guy that whatever he would be the hero of another book, right? But in my book, I'm like, no, I don't want him as the hero, because I want the girls to be the focus of the book. So yeah, I agree, he is annoying. He is definitely annoying. Yeah.
Why would you want to write Sam like the way she is? She's all like, when she's female, she's completely different. When she's with TikTok, she's different. Why would you want her portray her like that?
I just wanted her to be kind of torn between these two people, because in some ways I am following the Lord of the Flies plot a little bit, because again I wanted this to be this parallel book. And in Lord of the Flies, Ralph, the main character, is kind of caught between Piggy and then like Jack, who is kind of the, I guess, closest to Ritika in the situation, like kind of villain. So I did want her to feel torn and conflicted. That's really why. Yeah. She's asking how long it took for me to write the book. It took me about a year, but I have learned that this children's book industry, and you wouldn't think this is a children's book, right? This doesn't strike me as a children's book, but Scholastic lumps everyone together as a children's book, and that market, so everyone from like babies up through like age 20 or 19 it's still a children's book, and that market works a little differently than the adult market. Like, and one of the ways it works differently is it's very slow, very slow. So with my other books, it's always about it is slow anyway. Like when you get a contract, it still takes about a year for the book to come out, which is slow. But you have to do all the editorial processes. With this book, it took 2.5 years for the book to come out. In fact, I finished a whole other book and half of another book before this book came out. So it was just incredibly slow, and I have a bunch of friends who are authors in all different kinds of fields of writing, and they tell me that the children's book industry just is its own, it's almost like in a different age. It just operates slowly. So, yeah.
Out of all the books you publish, do you have a personal favorite?
Do I have a favorite? I do, like, this book Mix is kind of near and dear to my heart. I don't know, I like, that might be my favorite. And then the book I just finished also might be a favorite. Not, you know, they're all favorite. They're all, you know, obviously I'm fond of them all because I wrote them. But the book that I just finished, which is about, it's kind of like the sci-fi book a little bit, that might be my favorite. Yeah.
So I know in the book you mentioned that Chester is like part Native American.
Yeah.
So like, what's his other ethnic background?
It's not revealed, right? But that is an interesting question because I had overwhelmingly good reviews by what are called the trade publishers. So when your book, before it comes out, publishing houses send it to these they're trade reviews, they're called. And their names you guys have probably heard of: Kirkus, Booklist, Library Journal. And those reviews matter because then the publisher, you know, depending on how those book reviews go, they're more or less likely to do a lot of marketing or less marketing for you. But what was interesting was that one of the only negative, it wasn't even really negative, the only so-so review I got was from a trade reviewer that identified all my multiracial characters as like not multiracial. Like Chester was actually, they called him the white dude. So I think that just showed, which, you know, maybe he is kind of like that stereotype, but I think that kind of just shows how like this whole field of having these like genuine voices is so important, because a lot of the reviewers read from their own vantage point and they're not seeing the characters as the author presented them, or how, I don't know, like 80% of the rest of the population would interpret them. Yeah, so I left that, to answer your question, I left that up to chance, you know, it's your own interpretation of what he is. Yeah. Yeah.
Like in the industry, have you met like any like big authors, and if so, like who's your favorite?
Yeah, I have met a lot of big authors, and what you find out is that it's a very small industry. Like once you get in it, you'll be surprised at like how small it is and how interconnected it is. And just to give you a sense of how small it is, one of my best friends from college is this guy named Jake, and a couple of weeks ago, and he wrote a review on the back. I think it's on the back. I don't know if his made it on the back, but is there Jake Halpern?
Yeah.
All right, so he's written some YA books. He's a journalist. He's written a lot of different kinds of books. And I'm reading the news, and I see, and he lives in New Haven, and I read the winner of the Pulitzer Prize this year is Jake Halpern. So, and he's, you know, just a regular guy. That to me, he's a regular guy. He won it for a graphic comic that ran in the New York Times for 10 consecutive weeks, and he wrote the text, and his friend did the illustration, and it's about a Syrian refugee family. So when I say comic, it's not funny, but like it's a graphic, and he won it. And so when I say that, like, he is now this huge name, right? He won the Pulitzer, but the world is so small, it doesn't really feel like these big names are as big as they are. You know what I mean? Because you start meeting them as regular people. Yeah. Sure.
I'll start with like the simple one. Are you multiracial also?
So, my husband is Russian, and my kids look so, like, very Caucasian. So I frequently think about that because, like, technically they are mixed race, but they don't look it, and I think that their experience in life is going to be really different than mine. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and that's, like, part of the complexity of, like, the multiracial authors, and, like, even though they're, like, everyone is united by the fact that they're mixed race, like, a lot of people who are multiracial only identify one way anyway. Like, you know what I mean? Like, another writer friend is Matt Johnson. Have you guys heard of him? He's done a lot of different stuff too. He's half black, half white, and he identifies as black only. So, like, even though you have that intersection, it's very complicated because you have people like Matt who are only going to identify one way, and then you have people like my kids who are technically mixed race but don't look like it at all. So it's a very complicated group. Yeah.
What decision led you to pick kids from a private school rather than a public school?
Well, I had to get the kid. Her question is why did I pick a private school? I had to get these kids to an abandoned island, right? And I'm thinking, like, would kids from North Haven High School be in the South Pacific? Not likely, right? But it worked in that the private school, you'd have this Mr. Singh, Ritika and Rish's dad, being super wealthy, and he would have the money to fly them separately. Because I not only had to get them to this island, but I had to get them to this island without many adults, which is unlikely to happen, right? So you had only the pilot, which I think is already a stretch of, like, you're stretching your disbelief already. Because I couldn't have all these adults on the plane and them surviving. That actually completely changes my story. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Yep.
What's your favorite novel?
My favorite novel? I think that's impossible. I read all over the map. I read classics. I read like pulp stuff, or like Stephen King, or I read picture books because one of my kids is 7 and one's 11, and he reads. So I read all over the place. I don't think I really have a favorite. But through that all, what I found out is that, like, a good story is a good story is a good story. So I don't really care if the good story is coming from, like, a 20-page children's book or a 700-page novel. It doesn't matter. Kind of the point is the same. It still has to be a well-crafted story that's engaging. Yeah. Yep.
Have you read works from, like, Lee Wrightville, like Lee Wrightville, or authors that, authors that write volumes?
What was the title? Because I didn't hear it.
Like the author of Lee Wrightville.
I haven't read that. But I've read a lot of YA just because I enjoy it, and B, like, now I'm in it, so I kind of have to know what's going on. But I have to know. Would you recommend that author? Should I be reading this author? Okay. Yeah. It might. A lot of books get options, so that means, like, they get bought, but they don't get made. So one of my books, like On Borrowed Wings, actually got optioned, but it was never made. Of course, I would love it, obviously, because, it's just like another way of bringing the story to life, and it would be neat. It's possible. I think that all my books, like, the way my mind is when I write them, I am a very visual thinker and learner, so I think a lot of my books could be, just not because they're necessarily worthy of being made into a film, but more because when I write them, I do it in a visual way that would translate well to, like, TV or film. Yeah. You never know. I hope so. Yeah. Yep. Oh, how about you and then you? Okay.
Okay. So, as a graduate of Yale University, it's like I'm really interested in that college. Did you talk about your experience as a multiracial person in your college application?
I didn't, and I think, I didn't really come into my own understanding of being multiracial until later. remember like growing up, my school, like I was the only, like my brothers and I were the only Indian kids except for one other like half Indian family. And weirdly enough, this guy who's in my class in North Haven is also a young adult writer. His name is Chris Babu. I remember thinking like, I didn't quite fit there, but then also at Yale and beyond, there would be like the Indian like club or whatever, and I didn't really fit in there either. And it was only kind of later that I started to think about how like being mixed race is kind of its own identity. You know what I mean? So it was more. It was something I thought more about as an adult. But I think it's a lot different today because you guys have so much more exposure in connectivity through like social media and the internet than I did. So I think you have a way better exposure to bigger ideas in different communities. Yeah. Sorry, I missed you before.
As a writer yourself, as a writer of a book as well.
Okay, yeah.
What was the hardest thing you found while writing this book, or like the process?
She's asking what was the hardest thing. Probably revising it, because when I started this book in particular, I cut off I think 80 pages of it, just because I had to. So it was like it's a painful process to cut whole chapters and whole characters out. Yeah, it's not easy, but it always pays off. And one thing about editing is that I don't think I've ever once come to the end of a book where I was like, darn, I wish I hadn't edited that as much. You know, it almost always pays off to revise and to cut and to prune and to perfect. Yep.
Is there gonna be a second book?
Yeah. So how many of you hate the ending if you've read it? Yeah, I've heard this kind of universally, like everybody hates the ending. And I like talking to students because you guys just tell me that. Like there's no dancing around it. So yeah, if I did, it definitely is ripe for a sequel. I would do it. I think it really depends on how well it performs. Honestly, it's doing well so far with sales, but we'll have to see. Well, I don't want to do it if there's not a readership in place for it already. So, yep.
Why did you make this book as graphic, or real as Lord of the Flies?
I wanted it to be like that because, again, it is meant to be read. It can be read alone, but it can also be read with Lord of the Flies. And the last thing I wanted to do is to make a Lord of the Flies book that had girls and then was all like kind of frou-frou and like they're braiding each other's hair and you know, that was not the book I wanted to write. I wanted it to be like an authentic experience of like how girls might react in this ultra-charged, ultra-violent way. Do you know what I mean? I purposely wanted it to have that same dark feeling as Lord of the Flies. Do I think that that's what would happen with any group of kids on an island? No. Is my own thinking about human nature that dark? Definitely not. But that was the book I set out to write. Yep.
Did you like run into issues with writing this book with like the Lord of the Flies and like the plot?
Like copyright issues? Yeah, that's actually a great question. Yeah, Lord of the Flies is still under copyright, so I had to be really careful about that. It was a little bit of a dance because you want it to be a compliment to that book, but I in no way wanted to take too much of that book that it could be a plagiarism issue or impede upon that, you know, whatever. So I had to be careful, but Scholastic is such a huge corporation full of many lawyers that it's not a problem. Like I edited out anything that could have been construed as encroaching too close on Lord of the Flies. Yeah. That's actually an excellent question because you have to be careful about that. Yeah. So maybe like one more question or two more questions? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I meant to talk about that. I'm glad you asked that. wanted to talk about that. So why is the book called Damselfly? There are 3 reasons. Something's happening.
Why, Aria?
Oh, you want to ask
the same question?
All right, yeah, something's cracking up. There are 3 reasons. So first, damsel means girl, right? Do you guys know that's like an old-fashioned word for damsel? So that works really well. Second, Damselfly, Lord of the Flies share enough of a similar overlap that you might get that they're kind of connected. And then third, I had no idea what this damselfly insect is like until I read more about it. It's this close cousin of a dragonfly, which I'm sure you guys know, right? You've heard of a dragonfly? It's like one of these little big flies. But what I read about these damselflies is they're really pretty. They have these elegant wings and whatever, but they're these really ferocious hunters. So when they eat other insects, and when they go in for the attack, they're pretty ruthless. So that worked as in symbolic value for my book too. So you have the damsel, you have the damselfly as a connection to Lord of the Flies, and then you have the fact that this damselfly is a pretty ruthless creature, reminding me a little bit of Reading Good. I guess 2 more questions and then we'll stop. Yep.
Is that why the back cover is like this?
Yeah, that exactly. So that I really like that one. I wanted that as the front, but it was chosen for the back. But I do like it, and I'm glad it got worked into the book somehow. Yep.
How did you create the characters?
Say it a little louder.
How did you create the characters?
How do I create it? Just my imagination, you know. You guys have it in you too, I'm sure.
Are you really confused?
Is it confusing? I can tell you no, because we all have our things that we're better at than others. And I can tell you that in high school, my best friend did all my math for me. So that was not my strong suit. But writing has always been in character development, has always been something I was pretty good at, luckily. But I also think, if you guys are serious about writing, the more you write and the more you read, that you go hand in hand, the better you guys will get too. Yeah. All right, so maybe we can wrap up. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed talking with you. You had a lot of really good questions, so it was nice. Thank you.
I have that. I have some snacks. You certainly can help yourself. There's water. There's the juice that people asked for on the table, and there's chips and so forth. So get up, move around it. Would you be kind enough to sign some of
yeah,
your books and maybe
absolutely.
take a few pictures? And
Sure. I'd love to sign
all right,
books. Yeah.
terrific.
Yeah.
So we can do that.
Can I get my? I have.
Yes,
it's the same
yes.
type of pen. I'll get it out.
Oh, I have one. Or you have one you want to use?
I only usually use it.
What does that mean? A relic. A relic. You know what a relic is, right? My God, I'm sorry.
Are you alright, Aliyah?
Stop. Oh yeah, sure.
Taking a picture of yourself.
Mario, stop.
Here, you can shut that off now.